Hopefully we'll have more folks join. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So thank you all for being here. Welcome to the last community working group meeting of the summer. Thanks for sticking it out with us. I know we've covered a lot over the last few months, and we really appreciate all your hard work and input up to this point. And hopefully today's meeting will be kind of a good wrap up to all of the different discussions we've been having over the last almost year now. So just in terms of a quick logistics update, for those of you who either weren't at our last meeting or I think Kendra might have sent a follow-up email as well, but unfortunately for our team, Kendra Norell, our community engagement coordinator, has moved on to another position outside of the city. So we miss her a lot, obviously, and we really appreciate all the hard work that she put into facilitating this group along with Kyla. And we will miss her, but I'm going to be stepping in to be a facilitator for this group moving forward. And obviously, we still are lucky to have Kyla here with us as well to hold things together. Thanks, David, for putting the link to the slides in the chat. You all have the slides and the agenda link in your email invite as well. Just to confirm, are y'all seeing my screen? Perfect. Okay, thank you. So, as I said, today is our last. Oh, go ahead.
Exactly, something about after high
Oh,
school.
sorry. Sounds like someone's just not muted. So, but feel free to speak up if anybody has questions or comments at any time. Like I said, today's our last meeting in our series of 3 or so meetings that we've been doing on refining strategies, using our equitable implementation framework to do that. And then today we're going to be talking sort of higher level, going up from the strategies themselves to think about the overall RVAgreen 2050 plan and how we can make sure that we're measuring progress in a way that is relevant to the community and helpful, and also being accountable for the things that we've said we would do in this plan. So our agenda today, we're just going to go through, basics like we always do, settling in, ground rules. We're going to have 2 discussion activities today. We will have a break in between those. We do anticipate taking the whole time today, but if y'all work quickly, we can maybe end a tiny bit early. And then we'll talk at the end about what's next for the working groups and the RVAgreen 2050 process itself. So as I mentioned, today's objectives are to look at indicators to measure progress for the whole RVAgreen 2050 plan, and then also to start thinking about an accountability structure that we can use and the community can use to make sure that as we make progress on the things that we set out to do in this plan, we are doing it in an equitable way and being accountable for what we said we would do. So here are the group's ground rules. As always, I think for today, we're going to have a lot of discussion. So please voice your thoughts and also make space for others to do so. Feel free to remind us if we're ever not holding these up in our discussions as well. So just a few minutes of sort of presentation before we get into the first activity. Again, just as a reminder, here's where we are in the process. We're at the tail end of the actual plan development phase. So we've been working with you guys over the last, again, almost year now to develop all of this content, doing community engagement. And now we're towards the end of looking at, okay, we've kind of got our content pieces that we can pull together. But what do we do as far as that implementation? What does that look like? How do we measure progress? How do we ensure accountability? And then just for a little bit more specifics of what we're doing now and what's coming up next. So over the summer, we've been working on the strategies and this implementation and accountability framework. Over the next several months through early 2022, we will be working internally as the Sustainability Office, as well as with all of our partners on bringing together all of the content that we've worked on together to actually craft a plan deliverable. And you will be hearing from us during this process as we do this, with the goal of bringing that draft deliverable out to the community again for feedback and input, next spring. And then our ultimate goal is to have that finalized and approved and adopted by later in the summer/fall of 2022. So just as a reminder, here's our draft structure. We are all the way down here at the bottom looking at indicators for success of RVAgreen 2050 and then thinking more about equitable implementation. And a little bit more detail, this is where we've been over the last several meetings. So we've thought about the impacts of the strategies that we've come up with together, what the outputs and outcomes are. Last meeting, or the last two meetings, I guess, we were looking at equitable implementation. So, next steps for each strategy, who should be involved on the city side, on the community side, what resources are available to help with that implementation. And then today is sort of a final piece of all of that. We're going to be thinking about the strategies collectively and how we can ensure accountability and transparency in the implementation of those strategies. So just as a reminder, here's the equitable implementation and accountability framework we've been looking at for the past few meetings. For today, we're going to be focusing on two aspects of this, and the first one is indicators. So with the indicators for RVAgreen 2050, we want to be, this is going to be our system for measuring progress of the plan. And we have developed a structure to do that where we have a set of outcomes. Outcomes are the aspects of the future Richmond that the community wants to see as a result of the implementation of RVAgreen 2050 as a whole. So I'll show the full list of draft outcomes in a few minutes, but this is a concise list of things that we want to see as a result of RVAgreen 2050 being implemented. And for each of those outcomes, we will have at least one indicator, which is a data point that demonstrates progress towards that outcome. And what we're going to show you today and ask for your feedback on is this set of indicators for each outcome. And in particular for this group, we'd like your feedback on what we're calling equity indicators. And this will make more sense once we get into the actual information, but the equity indicators are getting a little bit deeper into each of the outcomes and how we can make sure that we're demonstrating equitable progress towards those outcomes. So typically we're getting, into like a more personal, like individual household level, how each of the outcomes is going to impact our residents with the implementation of our strategies. And so for this structure of outcomes and indicators, again, we have a pretty short list that we'll show you. And each of those outcomes is supported by a number of our pathways and objectives, and of course, strategies under each of those objectives. So just as an example, and this will make more sense as we look at the full set of outcomes, but one that I wanted to show is one of our outcomes that we've heard from the community, and that includes you all, all of our other groups, as well as the community at large, is that with the implementation of RVAgreen 2050, we want to have cleaner and more efficient buildings. And so an indicator that will demonstrate progress towards this outcome is ideally decreased total citywide building energy use. If we see that, then we are probably getting towards the outcome of cleaner and more efficient buildings. On the equity indicator side, though, we want to take a look at how this outcome can benefit people, and particularly those in communities on the front lines of climate change, as well as the whole city. So a proposed equity indicator for this outcome is the proportion of households with high energy burden. And energy burden is the proportion of a household's total income that is being spent on utility bills. So if we see that we have decreased energy burden across the city, and especially households that face high energy burden, if we see less of those, then we are hopefully demonstrating equitable progress towards cleaner and more efficient buildings. Now, this is what we have sort of drafted, and you'll see all the ones that we've drafted internally, and we want your input on those. And then lastly, we're not showing this level of detail, but obviously a number of strategies within the draft plan at this point would support the outcome of cleaner and more efficient buildings, particularly in the pathway of buildings and energy. So here is our list of 12 outcomes. These were arrived at through looking at all of the work that you guys have done over the summer, looking at impacts and how we want to see, excuse me, RVAgreen 2050 helping our community. Sorry, I had to do a conference this morning, so hopefully I don't lose my voice today. Um, and as I said, we just want to show that these outcomes are really plan-wide across all of RVAgreen 2050. So don't try to read this slide in detail at all. We just wanted to show that across the top, we have our 12 proposed outcomes, and the red X's indicate where strategies and objectives within each of our pathways support those outcomes. So we don't have particular outcomes for any individual sort of pathway. They're really across the board. And sorry, I just got a chat message. David with the library, can you hear me? You can either type or come off mute. Oh, thanks, Richard. Let's see. Sorry, guys, but I want to make sure that David can hear us. See, I'm going to go to the participants list and see. It looks like he's admitted. Make an attendee. Okay, so I'm not quite sure. David Sale, do you mind just typing in the chat to David? Maybe try logging out of the meeting and coming back in. Hopefully that will help him and get resolved. Thank you so much. Okay, so that is sort of the end of like the presentation material. So again, what we're going to be doing with this first activity is looking at this set of proposed outcomes and the draft indicators that we have come up with based on all of the community feedback that we've heard. And we have a few discussion questions that we're going to be asking you all to consider in this activity, which we'll be doing in 2 breakout rooms. The discussion questions are these the right indicators? And especially for this group, the equity indicators for the outcomes. For all of these, we will be reporting on in some format. So if we don't yet know where the data for these indicators can come from, do you all have any ideas about how we could get that data? And then I should have mentioned this in my previous comments, but which of the indicators can be disaggregated or separated out by race, income, and other factors? So going back to my example that I was showing about energy burden, we not only want to look at the total percentage of households that are facing high energy burden, but we want to look at, as far as the data can tell us, what proportion of those are households of color, namely Black and African American and Hispanic and Latino. What are the different income levels associated with these higher energy burden households, and potentially other factors, so that we can make sure that we are seeing equitable progress being made across the board. So what we're going to do now is break up into 2 rooms. There will be half of us that stay here in the main room with me, and then the other half will go into a breakout room with Kyla. It's going to take me just a minute to set these up. So does anyone have any questions while I get this together? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other. If anyone is on camera, totally fine if not. All right. This will probably take me about 2 or 3 minutes. So if you want to step away real quick, get a glass of water, run to the restroom or anything, please come back at 1:20 and we're going to go ahead with our breakout discussion. And David Library, that's how your name is appearing. Just wanted to see if you are able to hear us now. Well, if you can hear me and you just can't type or come off mute, then just know that we are recording this and we will share the link to the recording after the meeting. And you'll also have access to these slides afterwards, so you can put in any feedback that you'd like. All right. All right, I think I've got the breakout rooms. Kyla, if you just want to text me or something if I didn't do this right and you end up in somewhere weird, let me know, or you can just come back. But hopefully I will be doing this correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and start them. We will come back here. We have 45 minutes for this activity. So I will stop the breakout rooms if people are not back in the main room at 5 after 2. All right, so I'm guessing this is taking a minute to have everybody go into the breakout room, and then we'll get started in just another minute or so.
I think what happens sometimes is if people are using Teams on the browser, they can't go to the breakout. So if there are people who are left in the main room that aren't going, it might be a browser issue.
Got it. Thank you for telling me that. Let me see. Okay, well, it looks like we still have 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we don't quite have even numbers, but I think that's okay because I don't want to mess anything up. And I just realized I didn't do that thing where people can leave that room, so they just have to wait till I close it. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen again, just so we could all be looking at the same thing, but y'all have access to these slides as well. Feel free to be typing notes, looking back through the information, anything that's helpful to you. What we're going to be doing is, going through each of the 12 outcomes that we've identified and going through the indicators and getting your feedback, particularly on these equity indicators. And again, the questions we want to be asking are for you to consider and give us input on are these the right indicators to be using? Where can we get the data, or if it's not clear immediately where the data comes from, which of these indicators can be disaggregated by factors like race and income and others, and any other feedback you'd like to give us. I'm going to take about 15 minutes per slide. Each slide has 4 indicators on it. I'm going to go one by one just for a few minutes on each one, but feel free to let me know if you want to switch it up at all. So let's just start here at the top. The first outcome we're looking at is the one that was in the example. So cleaner and more efficient buildings. And the indicator for this one that we've drafted is total citywide building energy use. Ideally, we want to see that decreasing. And then the equity indicators here are average citywide energy burden. So again, the proportion of a household's income that is going towards utility bills, and the percentage of households with high energy burden or energy poverty. Any thoughts on any of that from anyone? Are these the right equity indicators? Are there other ways to demonstrate progress towards the outcome of cleaner or more efficient buildings? I'll just open it up for discussion.
Brianne, I have a question. This is Anya.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the title of equity indicator. Are we looking for like metrics that can be reported on these things over the lifetime of the 2050 project? I mean, up until 2050?
So these are for, so the answer, I guess, short answer would be yes, but we don't know that we will always use these indicators. So like if we, what we're going to be probably doing, and this is actually going to be part of our second half of the discussion, is something like annual reporting on all of these data points to demonstrate, are we making progress towards the outcomes that we set out? And so that's the general idea. This roadmap or action plan that we're working on right now, the strategies are going to be implemented through 2030, and then there will be sort of a refresh. So these ones, could change, but that's the general idea. Does that help, Anya?
It does. And then I guess a follow-up question to this specific outcome is, are you using the word building in a generic manner, meaning not just referring to homes, but can it also refer to businesses?
Yes, and that's actually something that's been brought up in another working group is, if we're not just looking at residential buildings, are there other indicators we want to be considering here? So we are open to any thoughts, but yes, the original idea here is cleaner and more efficient buildings just across the board.
Okay, perfect. So if that's the case, then I would add at least a third equity indicator. I don't know how equitable it is, but is basically a duplicate of number 2, but to businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that.
Brianne, this is Sarah with Richmond City Health District. I would be interested in looking at the types of buildings that are using energy, like something a little more granular, like the Coliseum immediately comes to mind as a building that's not currently in use, but I know a lot of money is spent just trying to keep it from falling down, basically. So looking at buildings that are not in use but still require energy. I'm sure that's not the only building like that either in the city.
That's a good point. And related to the businesses, when I think about like along Broad Street, those that are businesses that are on the bottom floor of older buildings, that some of which I know the upper parts are not being used, like how do if a business gets a report that, regarding their energy burden, how do they influence, or what support can the city provide to help influence the landlords?
And that's a great point. And we do see that households that are renting their home typically will face a higher energy burden than those who own their home. And I'm sure part of that is just the control over the energy usage, that sort of thing. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? I do want to keep us moving, but happy to stay on buildings if y'all like this one.
Are we looking at? I see Richard moving his lips, but I'm not sure if he's trying to say something, so I'll pause.
Yeah. Is energy burden have to do with cost? And is there a cost metric that we need?
So energy burden is you take the household's total income and just and then it's the proportion of that is going to total utility bills. So electricity, natural gas, water, that sort of thing. Okay. So it doesn't actually, energy cost itself is a factor, of course, but we're not looking primarily at energy cost here.
Okay.
My question was, do we want to differentiate between what type of energy these buildings are using?
Did you say what type of energy, like electricity versus gas, things like that?
Yeah, and their source.
Yeah, good question, Javon. I don't know, but not my area of expertise, but we'll write it down and we'll look into it.
Yeah, I think that's I like the direction she's going, and we do already track all of the energy usage by type for our buildings. But if we want to go a little deeper and identify an equity indicator for that, I'm curious what kind of data points we might want to disaggregate it by.
I may not be on the right track, but I'm just thinking about if it's a matter of places that have a higher energy burden, but they could possibly have access to a different type of energy source that would help
for accessibility purposes. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great to do that, I think.
Great. Thanks, guys. Any other thoughts on this one? All right, let's keep going and feel free to add more thoughts on your own, or we can come back to this. So the next outcome, again, this is across all of RVAgreen 2050, is an engaged and involved community. This one, I'll admit, was a tough one for us to come up with indicators that we could gather data for and try to be comprehensive enough to see how our community is getting engaged in all of this. So the draft indicators here are the total participation in climate action and resilience initiatives, which is something we'd have to define. But for example, if we as the Sustainability Office hosted an event, we can count how many people either attended or participated in a survey or something, and we could engage our community partners in this type of work to do some counting like that as well, just as an example. And then the equity indicators here are looking at the actual demographics of those who are participating in those kinds of initiatives to see what that looks like and hopefully get closer to a more representational demographics as far as the total city population. And then we can also track usage of things like the equity screening tool and climate equity index and any other equity-based tools that we might want to put out there as far as implementation. So would love to hear everyone's thoughts on this outcome and the indicators here or other ideas that you have on how to measure essentially community engagement.
One thing that occurs to me is, would it be helpful to document location of, if there's kind of specific events or action location based, because that might determine the level, ability to participate. So if you see a lot of things happening in kind of more affluent areas of the city, you might be able to track your reason for not having equitable participation.
It might be worth, along those lines, keeping track of time of day and location relative to public transportation to see if that influences attendance.
And maybe a cross metric of outreach, like how aware were people made of opportunities to participate.
Any other ideas for this one?
I'm thinking along awareness, so language accessibility, whether that's just like reading level as well as other languages, so Spanish, etc. And that's referring to like promotion awareness as well, promotion for language accessibility, as well as on-site. So if there's anyone present.
Great, thanks. So let's keep going. Feel free to come back to this one as always. So our next outcome is improved air quality. And this is going to be supported by a number of initiatives within the plan related to energy, transportation, waste. An indicator here that we can get data on is the number of days with poor air quality. This is measured by the State Department of Environmental Quality. An equity indicator that we've identified is neighborhood level air quality. So for those of you who, just as background information, the city, like as a whole, we do not have a comprehensive look at air quality across the entire city with a single kind of like measurement or device or anything like that. But there are efforts to get closer to that organizations like the Science Museum are working on with their air quality walks. There are also a number of air sensors being hosted by residents and businesses. It's just not really citywide yet. So this would be one that we would definitely want to track in the future. So with these indicators generally, it's okay to make a wish list, and part of our sort of overall strategy could be getting to the ability to capture this data. So any thoughts on the outcome of improved air quality?
I think a true kind of equitable goal would be, once you have that data, right, and can look at it kind of more granular level, certainly you're going to probably see, as in the past, kind of more affluent areas of the city have better air quality, is making the current kind of areas that could have the poorest air quality, moving them up to the same levels of the affluent areas, right? So rather than just improving, you're actually closing those gaps.
I think that's a good point. I was also trying to skim the next slides to see, it would be interesting to have a similar indicator, but for heat. So looking at temperature alongside air quality in different neighborhoods.
Yes, and I was going to say that's a great point, Sarah. We have our proposed indicator for heat, as we'll see, is one of them, I think, is looking at, the hottest neighborhoods and the coolest neighborhoods and wanting to close that gap. So I think that's a great point that we could make with the air quality as well.
Is there something you can measure about health? Oftentimes in poor air quality, where you have increases in asthma and other kind of breathing-related health issues.
Yeah, and Sarah, you might know a lot more about that, but there is a lot of data available from both the health department and I believe the census about health outcomes. And I know we have we have used adult asthma rates as one of our, social vulnerability indicators. So we can definitely do that. I just I don't know enough about that topic to know like how far what's the scope of like that as an indicator. Is that too broad, too beyond the scope of our plan, because it's influenced by so many other things? Or what do y'all think?
I think the more detailed, the better. James Minor here.
Yeah, I like the idea of including that.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, because a lot of the health indicators, sort of like you were saying, Brianne, are related to a bunch of different interrelated factors. So having like maybe a separate section, you're not trying to show causality, you're just saying that this is, correlated with a bunch of these different factors. And to your point, yeah, I think I'm trying to remember how frequently that health data is updated. I believe it's 2 years, but I'm not 100% sure. But there is, like COPD prevalence by census tract and asthma and a couple of other like sort of respiratory related indicators. So.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. I like that idea, Sarah, of like, here's some additional indicators that people just care about, that we could, keep track of because the data is available. Cool. Any other thoughts on air quality? All right, so let's go to the last one in this group. The outcome here is advanced green economy. So just across the plan, across the board, we've been hearing, we need to create well-paying, accessible, sustainable green jobs with these strategies as we're implementing them. So the indicators that we've identified here, and also engage businesses, I should have said, as the whole sort of economy. An indicator here that we identified is the number of businesses either participating or undertaking green practices. And this is not something that's currently tracked, but we could develop a way to track this through things like the city permit system and surveys, things like that. And then a proposed equity indicator is programs for the number of and maybe participation in programs for training, education, and apprenticeship related to climate action, resilience, and green jobs. So what are your thoughts on these? How do we measure progress towards a more advanced green economy?
I think we should take our city budget into account.
And what are your thoughts, Javon, like the amount available for these types of programs or just in general?
Yeah, I think it can be more general, definitely the amount that they're allocating to programs such as this, but kind of ensuring that they too are prioritizing a green economy.
Making my own about business attraction. I don't know if there's something there, but I know economic development works on that sort of thing. So they might have, and there could be something to track there. So just that's for myself.
There's a, excuse me, Brianne. There's a, when I was doing my job search, a job finder source that I came across with Virginia Conservation Network. And because they have that job board, they may be able to help with some of these metrics. Maybe they can even slice and dice it by, the state, because I know that they cover like a few state. Well, they have postings from other states. So anyway, they might be able to help. But and then related, I was looking, I didn't find it in time, but I just found it to help with the previous question on the air quality. I also came across a nonprofit called Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. And their purpose is influencing the legislature on issues related to health that is adversely impacted by climate change. And they are tracking things like asthma and whatnot, and probably can help supply some metrics as well. Awesome. And their membership is all physicians.
Great, thanks. Both two good ideas. Thanks, Anya.
Mm-hmm.
I think another way of thinking about the advanced green economy is from an entrepreneurship angle, not just locating or finding jobs or apprenticeships, but actually helping create new businesses, green businesses, and opportunities for that to be equitable as well.
I also feel that our public schools curriculum should reflect
Absolutely.
the work that we're doing around environmental justice, because that's a huge part of our education system.
Right. And I saw one of the equity indicators that said education, but I didn't know if you were talking about as far as being adults, but I think you're right. I think we should be educating our children in reference to climate justice as well. I really do.
There is a requirement in high school nowadays for economics and personal finance. It's a semester-long course. Could it be added to that curriculum? It's a statewide requirement.
What was the course called? Personal finance?
Economics and personal finance. It's required in the state of Virginia for graduation.
I also wonder if we should go back up to engaged and involved community and consider some kind of education indicator under that one. Because that could really get at, a good indication if we're gonna pull the next generation into our initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But I still think that we should introduce some of this stuff to our children at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in high school is good, but I think there are ways of introducing it to elementary students. I just don't know how. Maybe through a coloring book or something. That's talking about some of the things when it comes to green indicators or equity or whatever. We just need to find ways to do it. So that's why I like the idea of introducing it to students, not just on the high school level. I think we can do elementary, middle, and high, all.
And great idea. You should also think about, how to professional development for faculty, teachers.
Absolutely.
And maybe in teacher certification programs as well as just kind of independent PD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are all awesome ideas. Any last thoughts on this one before we go to the next? All right, so in the interest of time, so both of our breakout groups are looking at the same set of things. We just wanted to break up the groups so that everyone had, opportunity to speak in smaller groups. I'm going to take us to the last set, and then we'll come back to the middle slide because I see that the other group is already working on the middle slide, and that way we can kind of get make sure we have coverage of feedback across all the outcomes. So here, our first outcome that we're looking at is increased flood resilience. And so the proposed indicators here are the percent of permeable surface. So I think permeable surface includes things like green space, trees, permeable pavement, that sort of thing. And then also the capacity of our stormwater system. So, you know, I think this would be like actual gallons that it can handle of rainwater, so that we don't reach, you know, a point where sewage is going into the river or we're at a flooding danger. And then the proposed equity indicator here is the number of standing water and flooding complaints, which we can get through the RVA 311 system. And I know that's not perfect, but it is data that we have access to. And then also calls for service to like emergency communications centers resulting from or during like really heavy storm events and flood events. So that we can kind of get a picture of where these things are happening, who's calling in, and the number of people who are facing these issues. Again, knowing that none of those are perfect. Thanks, Anya, for those links.
Yep.
So what's everyone's thoughts on flood resilience?
I like the indicator for permeable surface.
It seems like there might want to be maybe a communications piece to this as well. You know, if these things don't work, so I'm thinking about Tennessee, what just happened there, right? Like really just fast floodwaters. What do you do, you know, especially if you're in a high risk flooding area in the case of a dangerous flooding?
So would that be more like outreach, like the people who are aware of, you know, what to do? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
I was recently looking into actually something I'd heard about in this group about the things you can get tax credit for in the city to help with water management, and you know, permeable asphalt was one. The rain barrels.
Rain barrels.
It is another. So I'm just thinking out loud here. So it's kind of like measuring the promotion for that, but also the participation in that, and maybe some support behind you know, helping people be able to, you know, especially for apartment buildings or businesses, you know, to get the rain barrels. Like, or I don't know, maybe from the relief fund that's out there now, helping people, like, you know, pay for the permeable asphalt as opposed to just, you know, repaving the traditional way, because that's not moving the ball forward, but it's probably cheaper.
Had a couple of sort of half-formed thoughts, but in addition to permeable surface, I wonder if looking at vegetation, I mean, it's related, but sort of knowing, you know, that increased tree cover and vegetation can help absorb some of the stormwater.
Like native plants.
Yeah. And then other indicators, like the number of permits issued for building within floodplains, or something sort of related to the location of development in floodplains. And also, I wonder if looking at insurance, like flood insurance, would be valuable.
I think in addition to the calls for service emergencies, we should look at just emergency emissions as well. Whether that be like an actual hospital or even something more local, like a, is it patient first or things like that?
If there's a program, and I seem to think that there is, to share, provide the native plants, is there some way to measure the number of donations, so to speak? You know, how many people have taken advantage of it?
Mhm. Great idea. Love it.
It could be also, I don't know if it's an indicator or what, but if you think about especially public housing areas included in kind of the design or upkeep of areas that the city or other organizations maintain, is, you know, planting native plants and maybe rain swales and things like that can be part of like the upkeep of these areas.
Mm.
Or maybe it's a parks program, I don't know.
Yeah. And especially include those in the new developments as well.
Yep.
Believe in that, HUD's trying to get rid of all public housing. Public housing will not look like it's looking now. It'll be totally different. There'll still be public housing, but the new developments will be probably involved in a lot of mixed-use projects.
Great. All awesome ideas. Anything else anybody wants to throw out there before we go to the next one, which is sort of related? All right, so our next outcome is climate ready community. And this is similar to the flood resilience, but we're talking more about social resilience here. And this was another one that was a little bit difficult to come up with ways to measure. So some other cities, just as ideas, are looking at like how to measure social cohesion and social safety nets. You know, how do you identify like, okay, our residents, you know, have a place to go, whether that's a relative or a city place to go when there's an emergency, you know, stuff like that. So some draft indicators we came up with for this one are the number and reach of services and initiatives integrating information on these climate impacts and readiness. So this could be, just as an example, you know, social services includes information on heat safety and heat preparedness in weekly presentations at the South Side location, and this many people attend. You know, something like that. And then an equity indicator here is using, again, our climate equity index, which looks at 39 factors that influence vulnerability to things like heat waves and floods, and seeing what proportion of our population is in what we call a high vulnerability category, and ideally seeing that that number of people, I guess, go down over time. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this one? I'm happy to share what some of the other working groups came up with this week, if that would be helpful, but I want to hear any ideas you have first.
My mind actually jumped back to the education piece.
Mm-hmm.
You know, measuring the number of students who, you know, take a class that might get created or something, so that they're aware of these things.
So it seems like the climate ready community, there's an indicator that's more information based, but the equity indicator does that mean, so the facing high vulnerability, is that just from awareness?
So that is actually based on more like demographic and health and other data. So what we did with the climate equity index was combine 39 factors that come from the census, CDC, and other sources. So this includes race, income, education level, age, underlying health conditions, and a number of other things that have the potential to increase someone's risk or a household's risk of harm due to something like a heat wave or a flood event or an emergency. So that's less about the information and about the like the, I guess, overall well-being of our community, maybe.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on this one before we go to the next one?
I'm wondering if this is also another place that we want to look at emergency rooms and urgent care admissions, if it's a matter of if people were able to get, are we trying to gauge, and this question may have already been asked and I just didn't comprehend, but are we trying to gauge if people are safe or if they have the information so that they can be safe?
I think for this one, it's the information to be safe, but also the access to resources to be safe. So some of the other working groups for this one have come up with, do you have access to like an emergency room or urgent care via public transit or a cooling shelter or something like that? So you have the potential, if you need it, you have that resource to be safe. Does that make sense, Javon? What do you think about that?
It sounds like a map would need to be, well, we already have a map, so maybe just like adding a layer to that assessment as far as like resiliency hubs or where the information is being distributed. In person, I mean, information as well as online sources, of course.
All right, so we've just got a few minutes left. Let's quickly hit the next outcome of less landfill waste. The indicators here are the annual tonnage of waste going to the landfill, and this is community-wide waste, I should add, and then the percentage of our community-wide waste that's being diverted from the landfill to be instead recycled or composted. And then for the equity indicator here is the percentage of waste being diverted from the landfill to be recycled or composted by neighborhood. So what are your thoughts on this one? How would we, I guess, measure progress towards the outcome of less landfill waste?
I don't know if this is the best place to put it, but I really feel like we should address the lack of access for people that rent to recycle. And so I'm wondering if we can share, like, by tracking the number of landlords that add the facilities, as you say, or the system for their residents to recycle would be one way to track it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Any other thoughts on waste? All right, let's quickly go to the last one and then we'll bring the others back and take a quick break. Cleaner and more efficient transportation. So the indicator here that we've drafted is the increased mode shift away from single occupancy internal combustion engine vehicles. So this would measure everyone who's like using public transit, walking, biking, telecommuting, and also driving if they use an electric vehicle. So clean and multi-person transportation, or whatever the word is. And then the equity indicator here, percentage of people within a 10-minute walk of a transit stop with amenities. So not just like a bus stop sign on the side of the road, but something that has a cover and a bench. And we can disaggregate that in data by things like neighborhood, race, and income, and other factors as well. Any thoughts on those?
For additional equity indicators, I might add like bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So looking at, the percentage and quality of sidewalks by neighborhood and protected bike lanes.
And Sarah, just real quickly, can you remind me of the transportation related group that you are a part of, or were at least like a few years ago?
Yeah, I'm still working with a group of people called Complete Streets.
Complete Streets, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Remember, but I knew there was like a term for this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the breakout room, but any other thoughts on the transportation indicator here?
Can you share what the abbreviation is there?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I see it. Never mind. Single
Yeah.
occupancy. Okay.
internal combustion engine vehicles. Yeah, I think that was honestly my own brainstorming when we were drafting this. I was like, okay, so this is an actual calculation. Like, how would we do this? So that's where that came from. All right. So looks like the full group is back. Sorry to Kyla and your breakout room for not doing the setting where you could come back when you're done. My bad. And I will get better with Microsoft Teams breakout rooms. So thank you all for your thoughts on all of those. I know at least our group didn't get to everything. So feel free to go back into these slides, over the next probably week or so, and we'll send them out in a follow-up email and put any additional thoughts you have, or let me know if you just want to have a one-on-one brainstorming discussion, because a lot of these we can get pretty deep into as far as the specifics, especially related to data, and we're happy to do that if you are interested. But for right now, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll launch into the second half of our discussion and our second activity. So come back at 2:10, and we'll see you then. All right, Dawn or Kyla or anyone that's a Microsoft Teams person, I have a quick logistics question before we get started, if anyone's back. All right, let's go ahead and get started in just a minute. Dawn or Kyla, are you back in the meeting room?
I'm here.
Hey, Dawn. I had just had a question about the recording. So it's still showing, I'm recording, but the countdown or the timer has stopped. Do I need to restart that to keep recording or something?
It's
No.
still counting on my end.
Yeah, it's counting on mine as well.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So I don't know what's happening. Thanks, guys. Okay, let me share my screen. Hopefully folks are coming back. We're in the home stretch now, and we have one more discussion topic that we want to hit with you guys. We're going to do this all together instead of going into breakout rooms. So just a few sort of context setting slides that I want to show before we get into our discussion. So we are back to our equitable implementation and accountability framework, and we are hitting this last piece of accountability and transparency. And this, again, is across the entire RVAgreen 2050 plan and initiative. And we have a few discussion questions that we're going to be going through together and getting your feedback on. So the first one is, what does accountability for this plan mean to you? And I'll give some more context for these in just a second. And the second one is, how would you ensure equity is centered in the implementation of the RVAgreen 2050 strategies? So these are two pretty interrelated questions. So it's not going to be a clean kind of discussion in terms of now we're doing one or the other. But when it comes to accountability, we want to be considering, who is being held accountable for this plan as a whole and for the strategies within the plan. So as we were brainstorming this internally as a team, we were thinking about, okay, our office is accountable for a piece of this, the city as a whole, our leadership, the mayor, the community, our partners, who are all the actors here and what pieces are they being held accountable for, if any? Who ensures that accountability? And we'll talk about like what that structure looks like. So, if our office is being held accountable for something like, say, annual reporting, and we're going to do that. But what if we didn't? Who holds us accountable for making sure that we are doing that? How is progress being reported or communicated? So this is on that question of reporting on all those data points that we just talked about. Is some kind of annual report enough to be gathering that data and putting it out to the public, and also putting out information on how the strategies are being implemented within RVAgreen 2050? Should we be doing more or less? How should we be communicating that information? That sort of thing. How can we increase and enhance interdepartmental communication and collaboration? So this is closely related to, I think, the accountability piece and just working together across the city and with all of our other implementation partners. And then, just a small question, who owns the plan and what does that mean? So these are just, additional sort of prompts to get you thinking. And then the second part of our discussion, we're going to think about how we can ensure equity and within that is being centered in the implementation of the strategies within RVAgreen 2050. So a few sort of ideas, again, prompts here. We have the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable as one of our key stakeholder groups in this process. Should that continue on in some form, have a standalone group that is sort of guiding implementation? What is their role if that is something that we want to put into place? Can we use our existing tools like the equity screening tool that we all worked on together, or the climate equity index, to make sure that we're centering equity and implementation? And then again, just a small question, but how do we delegate power amidst the implementation of this plan? So the way that this is going to work, hopefully you all have access to these slides if you'd like to do this, and if not, feel free to just shout out ideas and we can take notes. But we're going to do sticky notes for this. So as always, I'm going to open up the slide notes here too. Feel free to write ideas on the sticky notes, drag stars to ideas you like, put additional notes or context or links or anything into the slide notes. And again, just shout it out, and we'll, between me and Kyla, we'll get it written down so that we have it as we move forward in bringing together all of the content pieces for the plan. We're going to spend about 15 minutes per question. Yeah, we know these are two big sort of hard topics, but would love to hear your thoughts. So let's start with accountability. I'll show the prompts once more on my screen and then come back to these sticky notes while you guys are. So feel free to take a few minutes to think to yourself and then start shouting out or writing down ideas. All right, so let's hear what you all think. Once we get to next spring, next summer, and this RVAgreen 2050 plan is adopted, and we are working with within the city and our community partners on implementation, how do we hold ourselves accountable? Who is accountable, and to whom, or who, however you say that? How does that all work? What does our reporting look like? Is annual enough? Do we just publish the results online, or should we do something more? I'm thinking more, but we want to hear what your ideas are.
Who owns the plan?
Yes, that is one of the questions. So in terms of like responding to that question, I guess what I can offer is that our office, the Office of Sustainability, is the main champion or steward of this process and the plan itself. So RVAgreen 2050, once it's like a thing, a document or whatever, will be our office's main body of work to continue to move forward. And so in terms of like ownership of like the logistics, maybe our office owns it, but we have, heard from some of our stakeholders that they want this to be a community-owned initiative. And so we want to hear, if that's along the lines of what you're thinking, what does that mean? Does that mean that the community is able to, have a say in implementation? What does that look like? All of the above. So not an answer, but hopefully helpful.
Well, I think I asked that too because it fits in with it sounds like your office owns the plan then, because you guys maintain it, champion it, will be doing any, hey, we need to update this plan, or here are the changes, here's what we've accomplished. Kind of putting that on you all as the owners. Whether or not we have input from communities, I mean, that definitely should be happening as part of the accountability piece of it.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Other thoughts, or feel free to just keep writing, dragging stars, however you'd like to share.
I definitely agree with the city, the community having part ownership, but as far as accountability goes, I feel like there should be a financial piece to, if someone is not holding up their end of the bargain, there should be some type of financial repercussion, because that's usually when people start to be aware that they need to do better, is when it's affecting their pockets.
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. And with that, I know we talked about this on the roundtable, obviously a little bit, but any sort of thoughts on like what that might look like, as far as the financial repercussion? Like, I'm just brainstorming here, but like, this is not, I'm sure, a popular idea, but a department's budget or something is impacted by their accountability for something that they're supposed to be doing as part of this, or are you thinking something different?
Absolutely along those lines. And it can be a mix of like carrot and stick strategy. So financial repercussions for people not following through, bonuses for those that do, and making sure that people aren't falling behind. So if there's like, oh, it's not fair that such and such got this, it's like, well, there's support. So I think we also need to address, what does that support look like if someone or a department needs it?
Does that mean that, does that mean that we have to have the buy-in from the other departments to actually implement some of the things that we're suggesting, or is it going to be mandated?
Mandating, mandating city is very difficult.
I'm for mandation. I mean, just to put an analogy on it, there's been a mandation that city employees get the vaccination, right, or they get fired. I don't think we may need to be that extreme, but this is also a crisis. So if we don't do something, there definitely needs to be like a very clear repercussion.
Yeah, but we've seen where departments have been requested to submit COVID-19 numbers, who's infected and who may have been exposed. Maybe a third of the city departments report that.
To add to this conversation about, I guess, city budget. So one, Richmond is strapped for cash. So I'm not in favor of any financial repercussions, because every department and agency needs their money. That's how we keep the number of people that we do have employed within their roles. I do think that accountability, I agree to that point about the mayor's budget. And so I feel like this plan needs to be fully funded, and council needs to ensure that it's fully funded. And I also think we have to go one step above the locality of Richmond, and secure funding from the General Assembly as well. So the accountability is not just from the mayor's administration, but also from the General Assembly.
I like that idea. Does this plan fit within the scope of any of council's standing committees that you know of?
So our, this is not my area of like expertise at all, but I believe, so our sustainability manager, Alicia, is like the main representative or conduit to city council matters. And I believe she reports on this most consistently to the council's committee on its land use, transportation, and there might be a third thing.
Yeah, I think it's housing.
Housing, yes. So
I
I
was
think
just
it's the one that she works with the most.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I wonder if it would be possible to have some type of regular presentation to that committee, sort of along the same lines of the person speaking before me, what they were saying.
Great. Any other thoughts, particularly maybe in the area? I see a couple of comments related to transparency and regular communication with residents. Um, uh, any thoughts on like, more on what that would look like, either, on the regular communication side, like how often and how we actually report progress, things like that?
The city, well, I can't remember the exact city, but it's in Hawaii. I think it's Maui. They have a portal where businesses and residents can register to not only input their own climate action changes, but they can also see how the city is doing in general. And so I'm happy to share that link as far as consistent engagement and awareness around what we're doing as a collective. And that can also be made in like a printable version, maybe like snippets of infographics can be shared quarterly or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be great, Siobhan. If you find a link and can share that, feel free to follow up. That sounds good.
Yeah, I like the idea of quarterly communications, whether that's, just sort of like a quick email newsletter or something on social media or something, that's really accessible in terms of like readability. But quarterly sounds like a good cadence to me.
It should also be something that gets tied in with council people's reports to their constituencies.
There is a second slide for this question. Feel free to go to that if you want to add in more thoughts, since we've run out of sticky notes here. But I just want to keep this one up now for inspiration for other ideas. Let's take another maybe 2 minutes on this. I have to step away for 1 second. I'll be right back. All right. Any closing thoughts on this question? Although, as I said in the beginning, this is very much related to the next piece around equitable implementation. So any thoughts though that you want to share before we move on? All right, so last piece, I'm going to go to our second question, which is how would you ensure equity is centered in the implementation of our strategies? Obviously, very much related to the accountability piece. I'll go back up to the prompt, the sort of sub prompts for this question, just so we can take a look at those again. So in ensuring equity is centered throughout the implementation, and again, for this particular plan that we're working on, this set of strategies, we are designing them to be implemented through 2030, at which point we would do like a refresh of RVAgreen 2050 for another period of time. So In this implementation period, should there, for example, be a new standalone group to guide implementation? And if so, what is their role? Some of you may be familiar with the Green City Commission, which is a body of, I believe, residents and technical experts. Our sustainability manager is actually a member of that commission and does make sort of regular updates to that group. But there are pros and cons to that being, a guiding body, of course, to the implementation of this plan. So one idea that we have had is continuing the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable so that we have a group of residents who are paid for their time to help continue to guide this effort. Another way, and we can do all or both or more of these ideas, is continuing to use the Climate Equity Index and the equity screening tool. So for example, we could say from the outset that everyone involved in implementation of any strategy within this plan needs to use the equity screening tool at the beginning to, orient to whatever the project is or something like that. So we want to hear about your ideas about, do you like those ideas, something different? How would we make sure that we are continuing to center equity as we move from planning to implementation? I see we have at least one vote, or maybe two, since it has a star on it, for continuing something like the roundtable. Yeah, I'd love to hear other ideas.
I think anything that moves forward is going to have a mix of resident, business owner, and some sort of other, whether it's government or otherwise.
Do you mean in terms of like a guiding group for implementation?
Yeah, similar to what you kind of explained already that Ms. Zatkoff's part of. It could be part of another already existing group structure, but definitely would be beneficial to have a mix of residents, businesses, and governmental agencies.
Other thoughts on this? Let's say, because I see a couple of ideas here about, formalizing, having some sort of group that guides implementation in some way. I've seen models from other cities where this is like an advisory task force all the way up to like a decision-making body. So any thoughts on that sort of spectrum, like what the delegation of power, I guess, would be if we did have this kind of standalone group that was guiding implementation? For example, if our office, the sustainability office, is the primary, point of contact, I guess, for this group, are we going to them for guidance and advice, or are we going to them to, seek permission to change something, or they can tell us like, this isn't going well, or this, you're not doing this right, change the way that you're doing this? What's the sort of the role or the level of power of that group? All right, so getting kind of quiet out there, totally fine. Maybe take a couple more minutes, shout out any ideas or get them typed out on the sticky notes. You can always follow up with us too if things come to you later. But I'll give it 2 more minutes, and then if no one else has anything they want to bring up for discussion, we'll move out of our discussion activity and into wrapping up and next steps.
Brianne, I do have a point. So a lot of what you're talking about right now is we just have systemic barriers across the city when it comes to just decision making in general. So I think to this point about how do we ensure equity, I mean, one, and this feels very political, and I'm not sure that how to tackle this, but the reality is, from my observations, the Office of Sustainability does not have all of the power when it comes to purse strings and to decisions across the city. So it's like, really, what do those relationships look like? And not everyone who is in those positions of power at certain departments or agencies, whatever, has equity even at top of mind. So really here, everything that we're talking about is great. But there are these systemic barriers, and there's a level of accountability just for the simple fact of who is in charge of like the city department that will be responsible for managing a lot of this. So I just wanted to highlight that. So we have great ideas, but it's like, it is the city of Richmond. Like, I'm just keeping it real here.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Cherie. I definitely don't disagree with you at all. And I think with, yeah, great reality check. And I think one of our goals with all of this is to slowly start to chip away at some of that, hopefully. Getting it written down can be like a first step, and trying to get to that end result, I think will take some time. But yeah, I agree. And um, I guess that's it.
I am rooting for this office. You know, I
Yeah,
am.
thanks. We need everyone's help to do this. I'll say that too.
Hello. Also, I was just wondering how, I guess, the proposed Office of Inclusion, which is supposed to be a new department, would play into this, if any. Would they be able to maybe set some benchmarks or work with the Sustainability Office, and they, I guess, by their natural charge to be more inclusive, would they be a group that would be able to tell the pulse of how we're doing in terms of making inroads in terms of that? I know it's new getting off the ground, and that inherently has challenges, but maybe down the road with discussion, some kind of MOU, you say, yes, we will assist you with this, or we can cross or be a reviewer of your things to make sure yet there may things that we're not missing by this project being overall for city.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And similar to you, I don't have a lot of information that I know or can share about the new Office of Inclusion or Equity. I forget what the official name is, but I think that one is a great sign that is a thing now, and we are actually already connected with the person who's going to be leading that effort and contributing what we've learned through this planning process. And hopefully, I think that means, continued progress forward. And I like that idea of linking up with them to maybe help with this piece of accountability, or at least tracking what's happening across the city as a whole, so that we as the Office of Sustainability aren't the only people talking about this anymore, which is changing, which is great.
I guess one other idea maybe I had, I'm as part of the Office of Community Wealth Building, things that don't neatly fit into a box. Sometimes they get pushed to me, but like, for example, they created and wanted vaccine ambassadors for a lot of departments. I don't know if that was mentioned, whether a sustainability ambassador for each city department or office, just like you have automation coordinators for each particular office, can be that conduit between some of the larger offices and the offices, and they maybe can meet as a group when information needs to go out and circulate it in terms of that, to be able to help with maybe some of the accountability.
I think that's a great idea.
We've been trying to do that with emergency management liaisons in departments.
All right. Other thoughts before we wrap up? And thank you guys. I know these are tough questions, which is why we wanted your help in thinking through these things. So I appreciate the thoughts going in here. All right, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and move us out of our discussion activity. As always, feel free to come back to these and add more thoughts or reach out to us if you'd like to discuss one-on-one. Just to come back sort of in terms of what's next, relevant to that, our office is going to be taking all of this information that we've been working on together, that we've heard from you and the larger community over the last, I think, about 10 months now, and starting to pull together the different pieces of this plan. So this content development and drafting phase will go through early next year, with the goal, again, of bringing out a draft for community input around Earth Day of 2022. So we need your help with this if you are so inclined to provide more of your valuable time as part of this process. We have a link and it's in, I will follow up because I don't think David's on here, so we can't access the chat as city staff, but I will follow up with the link to this survey. It's a quick survey that you can take to let us know if you have the time, capacity, interest, willingness to help with any of the various pieces that go into sort of pulling all of this together and developing content that translates, all of these great ideas into actually like written concepts that are accessible in terms of language, and also detailed enough to be able to promote that accountability. So these are going to be things like actual writing, like translating technical information into accessible content, graphic design, photography, a number of other things, translation. So we have a bunch of ideas, but if you have other skills and abilities that you're interested in contributing, we'd love to hear about it too. So again, feel free to access the link now and do the survey. I'll also follow up with the group with the link. That is it for now. I'm going to open it up in a second to any updates and things that you all want to share. And Javon, I'd love if you want to share details about the air quality walks coming up. Not to call you out, but for now, I just want to say thank you all so much for all of your hard work over the last 10 plus months, and your work in general as part of this world of equitable climate action and resilience. Our next meeting, I saw, Anya, your question about the November date. So we don't have an exact date in mind, but I think that we were anticipating it being around mid-November, so before Thanksgiving. But we will keep you all posted as soon as we start looking to schedule that. That'll be the next time that we get you all together, and that will be to start reviewing this draft plan that'll be coming together over the next few months. That's all from me for now. So thank you again, and I'll just open it up for updates, reflections, and anything else that you all would like to share.
I'm happy to share about the Airwalk. So on Monday, another roundtable member, myself, and a member from the working group will be leading a walk in Jackson Ward Monday evening, alongside Devin from the Science Museum of Virginia. And the purpose of that walk is to connect with neighbors, share with them what the RVAgreen 2050 plan is all about, as well as for people that may not live in the neighborhood to actually physically feel what it's like to be and exist in Jackson Ward. We'll follow that one up with a walk through Windsor Farms, which is a more affluent neighborhood, and that'll be September 13th, if my memory serves me correctly. But I'll also put a link in the chat to our Facebook event, which you can share and join us if you are able. If not, please feel free to at least share it with your networks. And if you have any questions, I'll also put my email into the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Siobhan, and thanks for putting that together. It's definitely going to be a hot one on Monday, so it'll be a hot air walk for sure. And thanks for the link to the Maui example that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention the reason why the Science Museum is joining us is because Devin will be bringing devices for us to collect data regarding the air quality.
Great. Any other